Dear ladies and gentlemen, this video is related to highlighting the basic flaws in our educational system. First, I will share my thoughts on a powerful clip I received via WhatsApp from an unknown source. It featured a young Indian Muslim speaker, Mr. Wali Rahmani, whose insights on the shortcomings of the Indian educational system made a strong impression on me. Interestingly, the 5 key issues he highlighted are highly relevant to Pakistan's educational landscape as well. I will discuss each of these points and 2 more points that are relevant to the Pakistani educational system. So let us begin. Mr. Wali Rahmani begins by raising a fundamental question. Is the education system we follow today genuinely our own? Regrettably, the answer is no. The system we have in place is largely a colonial legacy designed and implemented by the British during their rule in the subcontinent. Even after decades of independence, this framework remains largely unchanged, with only superficial modifications over the years. But what was the real purpose of this system? The British designed education model was never intended to empower us intellectually or morally. It was crafted with a clear colonial objective, that is, to produce obedient clerks, not critical thinkers, individuals who could serve the empire without question, follow orders, and maintain the machinery of colonial administration. That same structure persists today, and it continues to shape us into what Mr. Rahmani rightly calls job seekers and corporate slaves. It suppresses the curiosity, discourages critical thinking, and fails to nurture leadership or innovation. In today's world, we don't need more job seekers. We need job creators. We need a system that encourages independent thought, innovation, and entrepreneurship. These are the qualities essential for building a progressive, self-reliant nation. This is the first and most urgent reform we must consider, that is, rethinking and reclaiming our education system so it serves our people, our values, and our future, not outdated colonial interests. The second key issue highlighted is the deeply flawed pass-fail culture that dominates our academic system. Our current educational structure has reduced learning to a binary outcome, that is, either you are pass or fail. This approach completely undermines the true purpose of education, which is to support understanding, critical thinking, and meaningful learning. Let us consider a simple example. Imagine a student in class 1 who is weak in mathematics. He scores 40 out of 100, just enough to pass. Despite having failed to grasp 60% of the content, he is promoted to class 2. There again he manages to get 40 marks and is promoted once again, without mastering the previous year's concepts. This process continues, and by the time he reaches class 10, he has accumulated a cumulative knowledge gap of 600% year after year of incomplete learning. Yet the system deems him successful simply because he did not fail according to the grading threshold. In such a system, students are not assessed based on their comprehension or application of knowledge, but rather on their ability to meet the minimum passing requirement. Ultimately, they earn certificates and degrees and enter the workforce, often into the roles that demand obedience rather than innovation, thus perpetuating the cycle of corporate slavery. This is not education. It is credentialism without competence. We are urgently need in a paradigm shift to move away from the outdated pass-fail model and instead align academic success with actual learning. If a student scores 99%, it should mean they have mastered 99% of the content and still need to work on the remaining 1%. Only when a student achieves 100% mastery should they be declared to have passed truly. By connecting achievement to learning, we can transform our education system into one that values depth, comprehension, and real intellectual growth. The third major issue in our current education system is its overwhelming emphasis on rote learning. Students are trained to memorize information without truly understanding it. They read and reread textbooks, often without grasping the underlying concepts or applying the knowledge in any meaningful ways. We seldom ask critical questions like, which crops are no longer thriving in our country? Why are agricultural yields declining? These are the real world problems that directly affect our society. Yet our education system does not equip students to understand or solve them. This is precisely the gap we need to bridge. Education must be relevant to the society it serves. It should focus on problem solving, critical thinking, and contextual understanding. What we urgently need is a shift toward experiential learning, where students engage in hands-on practical experiences that reinforce classroom knowledge. This type of learning promotes deeper understanding, sparks curiosity, and cultivates the skills necessary to tackle the pressing challenges of our time. Unfortunately, the dominance of rote learning has eroded our capacity for critical thinking. We are taught what to think, not how to think. To rebuild this lost ability, our system must prioritize practical, inquiry-based, and experiential education over memorization. The fourth critical point is the misconception that education is solely about academics. In reality, academics are just a small part, perhaps a drop in the ocean. The much larger, often neglected part is mental and moral training, what we refer to in our own cultural context as tarbiyat, that is, upbringing and character development. True education is about shaping well-rounded individuals. It's about how you communicate, how confident and creative you are, whether you possess critical thinking skills, and whether you are developing the ability to analyze, question, and innovate. It includes how you present yourself, how you treat others, how you listen, speak, and conduct yourself in the society. Unfortunately, we have reduced education to textbooks and grades, completely ignoring the human element. We left behind the values that make individuals responsible, ethical, and compassionate citizens. And instead, we have focused solely on producing high scorers and degree holders. Once again, I must say, academics do not define education. True education is holistic. It nurtures both the mind and the character. It produces leaders, thinkers, and responsible members of society, not just corporate employees trained to follow orders. If we are to truly reform our system, we must place greater emphasis on character building alongside academic learning. The fifth and perhaps Most damaging flaw in our education system, as mentioned by Mr. Wali Rahmani, is the artificial division of knowledge into rigid academic streams. We have categorized students based on their exam scores and confined them to narrow paths that limit their intellectual growth. For instance, if a student scores 90% or above, they are pushed into science. Those with 70 to 80% are directed towards commerce. And those who score between 50 and 60 are often left with humanities or the arts. This rigid compartmentalization sends a dangerous and misleading message that your percentage determines the value of the subject you are allowed to study. But what kind of logic is this? If a science student is learning to build an atomic bomb, shouldn't they allow be studying psychology or sociology to understand the social and ethical consequences of their work? Why should a student studying physics be denied the opportunity to study history or economics? Why can't a chemistry major also explore political science, literature, or accounting? This system ignores the interconnected nature of knowledge. It is a serious error to assume that learning must be confined to a single domain. Unfortunately, the colonial era education system we inherited does not support this vision. Why? Because it was designed not to empower thinkers but to produce obedient workers. People are trained just enough to follow instructions, not question them. We have continued this legacy by maintaining an outdated and restrictive structure that limits intellectual freedom and creativity. What we need is a flexible, inclusive, and interdisciplinary curriculum, one that gives every student the opportunity to explore diverse fields, develop critical thinking, and become a well-rounded contributor to society. In Pakistan, the education system is fragmented into multiple streams from the very beginning. One prominent stream is madrasa education, which primarily attracts students from poor and lower middle class backgrounds, families who are unable to afford the fees of mainstream private or public schools. Within the formal school system itself, there exists a further segregation. One path leads to matriculation, while the other follows the O and A levels, commonly referred to as the Cambridge system. These streams differ significantly in terms of curriculum, content, teaching methodology, language of instruction, and overall academic approach. As a result, these three streams, that is, madrasa, matriculation, and O and A levels, produce three distinct classes of individuals with varying worldviews, competencies, and opportunities. This deep-rooted disparity in education reinforces social divisions and perpetuates inequality right from the start of a child's academic journey. Seventh point is that in Pakistan, education and health consistently remain among the lowest priorities in national budget planning. Historically, less than 2% of the country's GDP is allocated to education, far below the UNESCO recommended benchmark of 4 to 6%. Even this limited allocation is often inefficiently utilized, with significant portions lost to bureaucratic mismanagement and corruption. In comparison, other Islamic countries in the region show a stronger commitment to education, with Malaysia allocating 3.63% of its GDP and Turkey dedicating 4.3%. This chronic underinvestment severely hampers the development of a robust, equitable, and progressive education system in Pakistan. Well, that brings us the end of this video, and I hope you have found it useful. Thanks for watching.